Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This is episode 132. Today we have a very special guest. He worked in various roles in the production staff of Seinfeld for 5 years, including as a writer's assistant, producer's assistant, and script coordinator. He worked closely with Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld, the entire writing staff. He had his hands on all facets of the show, including coordinating casting sessions and working behind the scenes with all production departments and network execs. He also appeared on screen in 3 Seinfeld episodes. We are very excited to talk to him tonight. Please welcome Jeffrey Yerkes. Jeffrey, thanks for joining.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here. It's fantastic. 130, that is a lot of episodes.
Yeah. Welcome to the program, Jeff. And hopefully we were right on a lot of what Tony just mentioned there. But you graduated Emerson College in what, 1990?
Yep. 90.
And July of 90, you were on the Seinfeld staff. How'd that happen?
No, actually, I started, and maybe LinkedIn is messed up. I started off at Saved by the Bell. That was my first job out of Emerson. And I started there in working as a production assistant on Saved by the Bell. And I was there for about a season until late 91. I got promoted to writer's assistant there. And then that was when a friend of mine, Karen, who I went to school with at Emerson, Karen Wilkie, now Karen Newman, said, do you want to come over and be a writer's assistant on the show over here? And the show at that point wasn't a number one show. It was like number 90 in the ratings. Nobody really knew what it was, but I knew Jerry because I'd seen him perform around here, like North Shore Music Circus or wherever he was here. And so I just knew about him, always watched him on the late night shows. So I decided to one day dress up nice enough for a job interview, but not nice enough to raise any suspicions. And I went over to, the Radford lot and had my job interview was with the 2 Larrys and Jerry.
You're kidding. Wait, Larry David, Larry Charles, or?
Larry David, Larry Charles, and Jerry were who I did my job interview with.
Wow. And you're a 23-year-old or 24-year-old kid, kind of fresh off a little Saved by the Bell.
Right. A little Saved by the Bell, which was a great,
great show.
Getting my feet wet. But when when Karen said, oh, you should come over and look at the show. And then I had this interview, which I'll tell you about in a second. I was really interested in it. So I went and had this interview, and the night before the interview, she told me that they used this bit of software. I don't know if it was Final Draft or what it was. And there was a manual for it. And I remember the night before, I'm sort of like poring over the manual, like, how am I going to do this in terms of like entering the script into the computer? It was like DOS. I don't even know if it was Windows, going over the manual. And then at that point, my girlfriend at the time, soon to be wife, said, what are you doing? He's not going to ask you questions about how to get to the C prompt and do all of these things. And so I just went to bed, got a good night's sleep. And then it was good advice because I got there and went into with the 3 of them. And it could not have been any less formal. They were probably on their way out to lunch, and it was about like a 10-minute conversation. And instead of like sitting over my shoulder, like Jerry saying, okay, like log in now and blah, 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 whatever. Larry just said, so there's a lot of typing involved. Are you fast? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fast. And he's like, okay, well, you seem like a nice guy. And Karen says you're a good guy. And then the rest of the time we spent basically them trying to get like gossip on Karen. So what was Karen like in college? And, so that was the interview. And then Casserole called me back, and I had the job, and then I went back to tell the people at Saved by the Bell, and the producer there was upset because he had given me my first job. And I told the creator of that show that I was leaving, and he's like, what are you cutting your throat? What are you doing? It's a small town. People have long memories and blah, blah, blah. And, and people, meanwhile, were like saying, just go, take it. You're crazy if you don't go, even though it wasn't, like I said, a huge show at the time.
Right. Was it season 3 about to start? Is that right? Or was season
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was there for the first full season. They did the 4, then they did the 13. And in fact, when I was it was either right before or right after the interview when I was still possibly going to be interviewing. That's right. It was right beforehand. Karen invited me to see the taping of The Deal, which was the last episode of the 13. And I remember just being on stage there. And I was like, this is just fantastic. And as much as, I liked my gig at Saved by the Bell, it's like that just felt a lot more right to me with my just sensibility of what I found humorous because I wasn't a tween.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So yeah, like you mentioned, they just got picked up after season 2. So what was that vibe like? You get there, season 3 is about to start. You got your first, you got the gig. What was like the overall vibe on the set? Was the exec still kind of hounding them about things? Did they have free range? Like how was their demeanor as far as like the ratings go, or the execs? Because we've heard a lot of different stories about that where Larry was kind of, it's hard to just, what was your sense about where they were at that point?
Well, my understanding is that they just weren't traditional showrunners. They didn't come from that whole background, so it's not like they ran things and they didn't have a writer's room. Their friends were all their stand-up friends who they invited to, who asked them to write a script if they liked it. Like Bill Masters and Bob Shaw, they were, allowed to come on and be on the writing staff, and so it was different in that way. I remember the first week was interesting. The first week, I remember walking in the office and seeing Jerry, who was wearing this very ill-fitting Kowloon T-shirt, which is this Chinese restaurant on the North Shore of Boston. And I guess they have a comedy club. And it was just very freaky to me. I'm like, how do you have a Kowloon T-shirt on? And also that first week, I remember we were all sitting, there was sort of an outer room. Jerry and Larry had their office, directly off of where the writer's assistant sat. But where we sat, there were couches and people, could sort of gather there. And I was there again with like the Larrys and Jerry, and Tom Sharonis was there.
Yeah. And
Larry was asking out loud. Larry David was asking out loud. He's like, I don't know if we have enough work for this, for Jeff to do. It's like, I don't know if we need 2 writers' assistants. And then and then we're all sitting there, and Tom Sharonis is just like, we can just fire the fucker. And I was just like thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm like thinking that I'm like right here, like he knows I'm right here. And then I could see that Larry David like bristled after, at the hearing that, because he was just like, he thought that was a pretty uncool thing for Tom to have said. Turns out in very short order, they did have enough work for me to do, but I was like, it was a little bit of, a little bit of trauma in that first week.
But it's funny. We always say we're big Sharonis guys, but I came to really, think a lot of him. It was great. And I used to always hang around him on the stage because I liked the smell of his cherry pipe tobacco. Oh, wow. And he was just, he's very, if you were on his good side, he was, he's very friendly. So that was great. So yeah, take us through like what is the job of a writing assistant? So, and we've talked to Peter Melman, Bill Masters, quite a few, Matt Goldman, one of the original writers,
Tom Leopold, who I love.
Yeah.
Oh, Leopold, incredible. Yeah. So, it sounds like, these writers might craft something, but at the end of the day, Larry takes it and just, does his thing with it at the end. So I guess where does a writing assistant like yourself, I guess Karen Wilkie did the same. Mm-hmm. How did you guys kind of lean in, I guess, especially during those early years?
Yeah.
On an episode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it involved, I mean, like you said, he got these scripts and he and Jerry had desks, opposing desks, like bumped up next to each other. It was like one big table that they sat on opposite sides. And then they sort of just rewrite, like you said, so it was in their voice, the scripts. But as they did that, they wrote it longhand, like Jerry on a yellow legal pad with his big pens. It was like, had to be the certain big pen, just the
rolling writer
barrel. And then Larry would write also like on a spiral notebook or something like that. And then they would hand out notes to us. So this is just like the script editing part of it. They would hand out notes to us, like in the handwritten stuff. So we would, take their handwritten stuff, enter it into the computer, and then we would be the ones to sort of like enter that all in to make that a script. And that was sort of like how the whole week went. Like after a table read, if there were, when there were edits, they would take the script, they would handwrite their notes on the script. And Larry would have these crazy maps for me to follow. Like on page 7, it's like, go to 6A, and there would be like 6A, you have to find the 6A. And there was a chunk of dialogue there, and then go back to 12 and, whatever. So that was when there were rewrites. But so we did this, like, basically putting the script into the computer. We were also sort of like the go-between between them and all of the different department heads who desperately wanted information from them, right. For like, what sets do we have coming up? Or Charmaine and Stephanie were like, what costumes are there so we can start shopping for them? And, and Larry gave us strict instructions. Like, I don't want anybody to have this script yet. It wasn't always that way, but there are certain scripts that he sort of just was, I'm guessing probably the contest was like this, or something with sort of like was a significant script that he didn't want to have anybody to know anything about it. He would tell us not to give out any information. But then I sort of developed a friendship with, let's say, Tom Mazzari outside of Seinfeld, just because we have family connections in New Mexico and stuff like that. And so occasionally I'd just sort of like say, there's going to be a barbershop. And so, like something that I knew was going to be in there.
Right.
Like I knew if there was a Jackie Childs scene, I knew that we were going to need Jackie Childs' office.
Right.
Because I just knew he needed to get started on things, and I figured it was a safe bet to tell him. And so, but here, just a quick little bullet of what we did. So there's the editing stuff. There's the department heads sort of just informing them. There was the standing on stage next to Larry during run-throughs and during recordings, when we would have the script all marked up with columns, and each column represented a take. And we would sort of just watch him watch the performance, and he'd be mouthing the words that he wrote, as he's watching them, he'd be like, like with his mouth clearly moving. And then we would just be sort of watching what was going on, but mostly watching him. And then if he went like this at a certain line reading, we would mark that in the script under that take. And then that enabled us to put together a whole matrix of a script to give to Janet, the editor, so that her first cut was pretty close to what we knew he liked.
Wow. So there's a lot of trust there. I mean, it sounds like you're basically Larry's right-hand man at that point. I mean, you're watching like the run through, and he's marking where things need to be marked for whether it's rewrites or, like you said, editing, all that stuff. And you're basically the person he's telling to, hey, Mark, make sure this is all, coordinated.
Right. And all the writers' assistants did that. I mean, Karen did, Darren Henry did the same thing, George Doty, after we hired him, like he did the same thing. So it's like, and then we prepared like a little mini script for Larry, so he would just be able to refer to it. Then another thing is I was also the keeper of the stand-up binder, which
was that with Pat Hazel?
No, that was whenever we recorded like 2 or 3 shows worth of stand-up on stage, I would record it with, I'm dating myself, those little micro cassette recorders, record them all and then transcribe them, dating myself even further, with a little thing with the pedals and and like just listening back to this whole thing. I would transcribe all of the stand-ups and I would keep them in a 3-ring binder. And then he would sort of refer to that if we had a show coming up and he wanted to see what stand-up was available to use in that certain show. It was a binder that he ended up leveraging for when he wrote the book Sign Language.
Oh, interesting.
So it sort of like just was like the archivist of all of the stand-up, current and past. So he sort of just knew what was available, what we had used. So that was another thing that
he had those sort of, he has those sort of like free package they would choose as they matched an episode almost.
He would, but we'd also do a lot of recording, like just, the same week a show was being shot or just after,
right.
That would relate to that. There was actually an issue. One time I got in a little bit of a kerfuffle with Jerry. because there were two shows. I don't even remember which the shows were. It was something like there was some storyline that two episodes had the similar storyline in each of them. I don't know if it was like a police sketch artist or something that was mentioned in one episode but became a storyline in another. And I remember the day that the show was supposed to be broadcast, they realized that the wrong stand-up was in there because I had transposed the two. I'd given one of them to Janet, and somehow like they sat through all the edit sessions and nobody realized anything except until the day it was to air. And then, so Tim Kaiser, the producer, saved my ass. And then he were able to satellite the footage back to New York or something, or, replace it. Or we replaced it for like the West Coast broadcaster. I forget exactly the details of it. But then Jerry was pissed off. He got in my face and he's like, how could you let this, it was like really, sort of this confrontation. And then afterwards, when things had settled a little bit, I remember going into his office and closing the door. And I'm like, look, I'm really sorry that happened. But next time, if something like that happens, or if you have any issues with me, please take me in your office. Don't like call me out in front of people or just go to town on me like that. And he was cool. He understood. He was like, yeah, this can't happen again, but I'm sorry I did that. And, so, after that,
wow.
Thanks. Yeah.
I would have been nervous as a young guy to say that to the namesake of the show. So like, kudos to you. So your first season was 93. I'm looking, the first episode of 93 was The Note. Was that the first episode you worked on that you remember?
That is. And I remember that I was like, totally felt like I was in the right place. I remember being there for the read through. And then when the masseur like pulls down George's pants and he like freezes up. And I'm like, I just felt like, coming from Saved by the Bell to this, right. I'm like, this is totally the right. This is like such a,
Jeff,
like, in the perfect place,
That I remember watching that episode live. Yeah. I mean, Wednesday night. And we rank it, we did rankings and we ranked The Note 7 all time, believe it or not. We have a high affinity for, the early seasons for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so interesting that, that was your first episode. Let me ask you this. So as a writing assistant, were you able to provide any lines, jokes, anything you mentioned to Larry ever make it on air that you remember?
Not really lines or jokes. I mean, certainly I worked on my own writing and Larry was supportive in terms of like, he gave me some feedback, on some things, and so did Larry Charles, but it wasn't such that I was able to get anything on the show. I mean, I think I did have a little bit of a familial impact in that my mom is the reason why Babu Bhatt got his name. So, so there's definitely. So I remember
we're listening. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, Jerry came out of his office and he's like, do you know any Pakistani names? And I don't know what compelled me to call my mother, who was a lawyer. And she said, yeah, there's two people in my firm. There's Babu Patel and Sudha Bhatt. And then of course we ran both of those names through the clearance company, and they came out, we couldn't use them because of course, like they're real people. We can't use their names. And so they just combined the first name of one and the second name of the other. And you get Babu Bhatt. So yeah, so she was that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know you had mentioned you interviewed with Larry Charles, and then you had mentioned Tom Sharonis earlier on. You were there for extended period of time there. We like to look at it as almost 3 eras of Seinfeld. You were there for basically 2 of those 3. It looks like you weren't, when Larry left, you had already, I think, not been there. Is that right?
We left the same time.
Yeah,
so coincidental. It wasn't like Larry's like, Jeff's going back, to hell with it. It was like we both ended up leaving after season 7.
Right. So I'm curious how, from your, especially because you work so closely with probably Larry Charles and Tom Sharonis, what was it like when they left after season 5? What, in your mind, was there, because there's definitely a tonal change in the show. I mean, it's evident, there's a tonal change in the show when they leave, but what was it like behind the scenes, if you will, vibe wise or anything like that? Was there a palpable difference? Was it, business as usual for you? Like, what could you tell us about sort of when those two departed, how things changed?
Yeah. I mean, it was business as usual. I mean, I could speak more to Larry Charles's situation because obviously Tom left and Andy Ackerman was there, right. But they were both sort of like they were both really good at just enabling, get to what Larry and Jerry's vision were. But yeah, Larry, as I'm sure you've talked about in other episodes of the show, we always were so appalled that it became like a show about nothing. And it's like, it was not a show about nothing. Right. It may have been a show about just triviality stuff, but it's in terms of plot lines, Larry Charles's plot lines were so
existential and just a lot of death, a lot of
trip to California,
darkness,
and A, B, C, D, and E stories, and just really complex stuff. Not to say it wasn't complex when he left. It was, for the most part, it was business as usual. One of the things that I did throughout, even after he left, was I would do story research. Like when George was a bra salesman, I had to call Maidenform and then ask them, I'm like, what kind of clasps are there? And I'm making notes and I'm like, okay, and what's the smallest size? What's the biggest? I'm like, they must totally pervy questions that I had to ask them. But it was like I had to get information about bras. So I called Maidenform. I also did. I was the one who actually got the non-fat yogurt tested because Larry came in one day and was sure after weekend that there was fat in a non-fat yogurt that he had ordered somewhere in the back.
Really? Oh, that's great. Did it matter if it was melted?
Yeah. And so, no, I had to then go and send a sample of it to an FDA approved lab. I had to find one first.
You're kidding.
And then send it and then get the report back. And we're like, there's a little bit of it's like Kramer. It's like, I found a hair. It was like, this is definitely has fat in it.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Because what I was going to say is they sort of to their credit, good comedy needs to be grounded in reality so that the audience isn't distracted oh, that would never happen or whatever. It's it needs to have some element of, maybe not the part of getting it tested, but you sort of just have to have things be somewhat real, like things that are coming out of George's mouth or whatever. I also researched the Briss episode, and so I did all sorts of research. I'm a Jew, so I knew firsthand a little bit of stuff, but it's I did some research on circumcision and
that's pre-internet. That's pre-internet in the mid-90s, So
you're making phone calls. You're doing the hard lifting.
I'm making phone calls, exactly. And so it's and I got a hold of somehow some organization called No Circ, this violently anti-circumcision group. And as a result of the research that I did for the Briss episode, I was on their mailing list for the next year and a half. And I would get these pamphlets with grotesque crazy images and these things because I was on this No Circ group's mailing list. And I was like,
well, you and Kramer, there you go. So speaking of Kramer, you mentioned Jerry, obviously the main four were iconic. I know it sounds like you played a part even in casting, I guess, with Hirschfeld. Just tell us a little bit, I guess, some of your favorite actors that you ran into through the years or kind of the main four. Any stories you could tell us about Michael Richards or Julia or Jason.
Yeah,
everyone we've spoken to, it's so complicated.
I got some stories. Just to clarify the casting thing, I mean, I worked with Mark and Brian Myers all the time, but a lot of it was I'd get sides from them. I'd sort of talk, to the same thing as I was talking about before with production design or whatever. I'd sort of tell them who they were thinking about or, what sort of character was going to be coming up, but it wasn't. And sort of I'd help schedule with Jerry and Larry, when the casting sessions were, and I'd have to put on a good face for all the people who were sitting across from me waiting to go into the room, knowing that they didn't have a chance. And so, yeah, in terms of, I remember also I talked about that first week where Tom Sharona said that thing and Jerry with the shirt. I remember I was having a hot dog on stage my first week there. And then Michael walked up to me and he said, you know, that's all cancer, right? And I'm sitting there eating the hot dog. and I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, yeah, no, it's there's all sorts of stuff in there. You don't want to. And I'm like, he doesn't even, he barely knows me. I don't even know if, you know, he knows I work up in the office or not. So he walks off and then I'm like, I like just devour the rest of it, like in shame, you know? But he was real, you know, it was totally fun to be there. I know his teenage daughter was around. So it was sort of like, it was a neat little family vibe that you got with Michael. I mean, he turned me on to some good African music. Remember when he comes into,
with Siobhan Fallon.
Yeah. With Sean Fallon. Yeah. Sean Fallon, and it's like, he's dancing. He turned me on to like King Sunny Ade music, which I think is what was playing. There was another thing with Jason. So because we're working the office, a lot of stuff just comes through the office, even if it's for the cast. And so Jason had just had a baby and we got a gift in the office. It was a gift in the office just addressed to Jason. And so Jason came in the office and I'm like, oh, here, this came in. I not even came in. I said something like, this is for you. And he's like, oh, thank you. And he took it and he walked out. And then about a week and a half later, I got a card in the mail saying like, Jeff, thank you so much for the great onesie. It was like so generous of you. And, you know, something you need to, and I was like, I didn't give him this gift. I just handed it to him, but he felt like me handing it to him was like, that it was from me.
That's like the big salad. Big
salad. Exactly. That's
so then I had to go, then I went into Larry Charles's office for advice because he was a good advice giver. He'd be in there with his dark sunglasses and his rosary beads and listening to Dylan, you know, and I was like, what am I going to do? Like, he thinks that I have this gift and should I say what, you know, how do I do this? And he's like, you're just going to have to tell him. He's like, but I want to be a fly on the wall when you tell him. I'm like, and it didn't end up happening. It wasn't like a fly on the wall, but I basically took Jason aside. I'm like, that wasn't me. And he was like, and he was very cool about it. He's like, well, it was their fault. They didn't say who it was from. So I'll just consider it from you and whatever. So it was like a funny little thing with Jason, but yeah, there was all sorts of, I mean, them and the guest cast. I mean, it was really great. I wish I knew, you know, as an adult, here I am like binging Breaking Bad and I had no idea who Bryan Cranston was. And had I known, you know, I would have totally, you know, ingratiated myself to him. So I knew him in later years, you know, whatever, but like, it's just, and Bookman, I was sad to see that he passed away recently. I still just love his role in Boogie Nights, you know, which was around the same time. I remember even driving down during the opera episode, Larry asked me to do him a favor and drive the guy who was playing Joe Davola like down to the parking lot because he had forgotten something and he was in a crappy mood. And so I'm like driving in the golf cart and he's in costume and he's just pissed off about something. And it was just totally like a silent ride, like 10, you know, like 5-minute ride down to the whole satellite parking lot and back with the clown. And it was just, it was some interesting stuff.
You know, you just mentioned Dylan with Larry Charles, listening to him, and it made me think earlier on when you were talking about working with Larry and how, you know, you're getting the original handwritten script. It sounds like, right? The first draft.
Yes.
I'm just always fascinated by like the editing process and what actually makes it. And like, you know, there's always like unreleased lyrics of these songs. And even with TV shows and movies, it's like how you edit them out and what was missed and all that kind of stuff always fascinates me. I'm just like, from your perspective, I mean, you're seeing these scripts for the first time and then you're seeing what ends up on screen and all of the in-betweens. Like what is that like? Like what can you tell us about like, that process as far as like, wow, they had to cut that out, or man, I'm so glad they added this during that part. Like, does anything stick out to you in like that sort of editing, like rewriting from draft to on TV that like, from your perspective that really like sticks out from back then?
To be honest, no, it's so long. It's so long ago. Like not anything.
I mean, you were in it, I guess, right? It was more like you were just kind of,
but not anything specific. Like, oh, they got rid of this line or this character. This character. I mean, obviously there was certain things when a character the guy who was going to play the Moyle didn't wasn't reading well, and they got replaced him, whatever. But like in terms of lines that were changed or pieces that were cut out, nothing really stands out. It was just sort of like each time it came to us as like for the first draft, it came out to us as a whole pad of paper. Second draft, it came out as a whole script with their notes in it, it's such different handwriting. You can tell them. Actually, Larry, I got so used to Larry's handwriting, I ended up signing all of his contracts for him. He couldn't be bothered, so he was like, "Could you just sign these?" And like all of the, because they would come every week. Every time he had a script, he'd need to sign paperwork for it. So I just got used to signing, his name.
But wow. From your perspective, kind of the dynamic between Jerry and Larry, like, I know Jerry was obviously on the show, but like from your perspective, who was Larry kind of running things from top to bottom, or was it that partnership we all hear about?
It's definitely a partnership in terms of like when they would write, they would just sit in the room together, and just out of it would come these scripts. I mean, in a pinch, like if, because at that point, Larry hadn't done Curb. He wasn't like so known to the public. Jerry already had all these, he had photo shoots and other things, other responsibilities and times. So there are times, the odd time that he had to not be there in a pinch, like and Larry was the one who could, like fully just do like, write scenes himself, and that's probably what Jerry did, obviously in seasons 8 and 9, without Larry there, had to just sort of take over and just do those things. But,
right.
But for the most part, it was definitely that collaborative process,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also, you appeared in 3 episodes, right? Background, Secretary, Pledge Drive, Pilot. Is that accurate?
The Pledge Drive. Yeah. The Pilot. What was I doing? Was I,
you were kind of on the set when they were shooting, like when they were doing the shot of the shot.
I may have been. I always wonder. It's like, I just think I'm a vampire. Sometimes I see these documentaries and I'm like, I'm not showing up in any of these.
Yeah. I was just like wondering how that goes about. Like even when Larry was on, like when Larry would be like, the newsstand guy or the voice on the plane or a voice in a movie or, the
guy in the bathroom who stinks up the bathroom.
Yeah. Larry Charles, right? Charles. Yeah. So like, do they just like on the fly, I'll do that? Or is like, I'm always curious, like, how you jump into those roles where it's just like, I'll be the guy in the back. I'll do this one. I'll do that one.
Yeah. I mean, that you exactly have that right. I mean, to be on the fly. I remember when I was in the Pledge Drive in the back, Darren and I were in the back row there. I don't know how it,
Yeah,
I think it may have even been, I don't even know if it was a Jerry and Larry thing. I think it may have just been, the director, like Andy or whoever it was at the time, or the assistant director saying, we need 2 more people up there. You want to, whatever, just grabbing some of us.
Right.
Yeah. Even Hirschfeld, Wayne Kennan, all these guys kind of hopped in. Were you, Fred Stoller's character was named Fred Yerkes. Was that an ode to you?
It was actually, they were looking for a last name, and I was in the office and I come up to Jerry's desk and he's like, how do you pronounce? He's like, I don't know. It must've been like, I don't know, early on. I mean, he's sort of like, he was just asking about my last name. I'd been there that long, but he was like, he's like, how do you say your last name? I'm like, Yerkes. And he looked at Larry. He's like, Yerkes. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, thanks. And then so he basically sent me away, and that's how Fred got his last name.
Oh, that's great.
So I was going to say, one of the other things I did, so it was, we did like things that were, in terms of, you ask about what our roles were. I was like working on the script and on stage and all these things. But then there were some, certainly like just personal errands that we'd end up doing. They didn't really have personal assistants. Jerry had Carol Brown. but then, Larry just needed us to do things. And I remember one of them was, I had to go and pick up the Chinese bald cure for him.
Oh, nice. The bomb.
Which wasn't a cream. It was like the way I understand it, and this is, again, forgive me, this is 30 years ago, but my understanding was that every year this Chinese herbalist would fly to Los Angeles in a Lear jet, the back of which was packed with these Chinese medicines, various Chinese medicines, one of which was a bald cure. And then somehow Larry became hip to this. And he's like, I need you to go to Santa Monica and pick this up. And so he basically had it was like a pop-up before there was such a thing as a pop-up, And so the guy, I went there and it was like a little speakeasy, and I, gave him the money, and he gave me these little packages, all these big, long cardboard packages, and I brought them back. And then, we didn't know what to do with them. Larry wasn't sure if he should take them. They looked like there were these jet black things that looked like boba in boba tea, like those little boba, little bubbles.
Yeah.
And they were like jet black, and all the paperwork that came with it and all the boxes, it was all in Chinese. We had no idea what any of it was. And so I don't even know if he ended up taking it or not. I can't imagine he did, because we're like, is there mercury in it? We have no idea. So it was just like, so that was, just another little side venture I had to go on.
Jeff, these are great stories. It's funny. You mentioned Bookman. You mentioned kind of being like in the casting room or out in the hallway. Cranston, you name it. We've heard, whether it's Bookman, there's been great talent that lines up outside. Was there anyone you saw out there that didn't get a role that you thought could have gotten it, or someone like super famous that never made the cut of Seinfeld that you recognize?
No, not really. I wasn't sort of like looking at people and with as like analytical an eye as like Mark and Brian were, obviously. And,
right.
And I think, well, I guess people like, Brian and Bookman, I guess they did have to come in and read. I don't know if they were big enough to be offered a role. I remember when they offered like Liza Minnelli a role in something Bette Midler got instead, but it was originally offered to Liza Minnelli, and she, it got back to the office that she had said, no, if you want to cast me, you really need to use me. It was like, it's just something very practical.
Well, Jeff, the only two, we've talked to a million guest stars now at this point, the only two who didn't have to audition, Tony, keep me honest on this, was Tawny Katayan, because she was dating Jerry, and Athena Massey, the 1P at a time.
Yeah, she had one line.
I don't remember Athena. The 1P at a time. I vaguely remember the storyline, but so funny. People like think that they have all these Seinfeld trivia nights at bars and everything, and people think I'm going to be a ringer. They're like, "Oh, you should totally go to that." And I'm like, it all sort of just blends in.
Yeah. We're not big trivia either with it. Even though we do a podcast about it, we're not big on the trivia aspect. We're more, we like the analyzing.
No, but I appreciate the deep diveness of it. It's like really, and it's been fun to watch. These shows and people I haven't seen in so long. It was great. Interesting. There were definitely people. Around the time Clinton was running for president. Linda and Harry Thomason, who were like his advisors, they were running Evening Shade on the stage over from us. That was a show that was being shot over there. At one point, Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise walked into the office, which is like the back of my head blew off. I was like, oh my God. First, it's like, I was like, it's Burt friggin' Reynolds. It's like, and he's with Dom DeLuise. It's like seeing a celebrity is cool. Seeing a celebrity like in an environment that you hope to see him in is like even better. So to see him with Dom DeLuise, it was like, I could not even compute. And it was like, he was there with the red tracksuit and the orange face makeup and the cowboy. Right. It was so funny.
I'm curious, this is kind of a 3-part question, if you will. So what was your favorite episode, right, that you worked on, like that the script was your favorite, like you're like, this is going to be a great one? What episode was like your favorite looking back, right? That like, watching it. I'm sure, did you watch the episodes? I'm assuming too, or you just were so in it working that you, I'm assuming you watched them like on TV. I mean, not like watching them, obviously watching them shot, but like.
Oh, I watched The Outing last night.
Okay. So what's your favorite? Yeah. Like what would be some of your favorite episodes watching, and then some of your favorite episodes kind of working on them, if you will? Like kind of, you remember like, oh, that was a great one. I remember like working on that script or whatever it might be, and then kind of watching them.
I remember in terms of a script, obviously this is probably no surprise. The contest, reading the script, is like, you can't even, you just know exactly what's going on. It was just hysterical. But in terms of production wise, there were a lot of like fun moments. I think people may have talked about this. I mean, hell, you've done 130 of these, but somebody talk about the parking garage and the ending that wasn't meant to be. The car was supposed to start, right? And that was like crazy. At 2 a.m, we're sitting there delirious, and it's like, oh my God, that's the ending. Why didn't anybody think of it? It was like, and so that was fantastic. It was fun to be in that same parking garage. That was actually a week that my mother and stepdad came out. They had never had a chance to come out and visit me in Los Angeles. And that was the 1 week they came, because they were sick throughout a lot of my time there. And the people at Seinfeld were very cool with me regarding that. But 1 week they were able to come out, and I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. I'll get to show them around and everything. That was the week of the parking garage. So I unexpectedly walked up, opened the stage door, and it was like a parking garage. And I'm like, what it's like, I wanted to show them Jerry's apartment and the coffee shop and all of this. And I'm like, this is a parking garage, so it was like, that was like a bummer, but it was like, but it was just like a fun, thing to be there. In terms of watching it, there's, a couple, like The Outing. I was surprised at how much I just laughed at The Outing, and that was just so funny.
I mean, that's Larry Charles.
Right now, let's have sex right now. Come on, and like, and I love the marine biologist with the Titleist at the end. Just so many. I mean, you were there for both of those, right? I mean, live on set, right? I mean, what an experience. It sounds like you've a good relationship with Larry Charles. It sounds like. Or any other writers that kind of I guess helped you out or guided you or gave you any advice? Like maybe a little bit about the writers. I mean, to us, it's all about the writers. We love. I mean, for us, it's Larry, David, and Jerry for sure. Mm-hmm. Larry Charles and Melman. Those episodes. Right. God, it's hard to critique any of them. Kind of those early years, but anybody else on set that kind of, helped with your career, just became a good friend to you? Yeah. I mean, they're off doing, people's lives take off, and we're obviously in different social circles, but, I've sporadically been in touch with Melman. I made sure to get his book when it came out, and, and sort of just chatted back and forth. And sometimes I'm in touch with Larry, David. It's sort of like, I'll see something funny and I'll ask him. Sometimes he'll respond, sometimes he won't. I haven't been in touch with Jerry since I was Larry's assistant called me when they had the reunion at Curb, and I couldn't go because of my nephew's bar mitzvah. But I was like, I was invited to go to like that. And that would have been a chance to see everybody.
Yeah. That's so great that they invited you.
I know. And so actually Curb, and so that was something also I was in touch with Larry years after the show ended, Larry David, because Curb, the pilot episode of Curb, uses a storyline that actually happened between me and him. I don't know if you know the story, the storyline. It forms the arc of like the whole pilot of Curb Your Enthusiasm, the hour-long special, which is I was involved in a Warner Brothers writers workshop. And after the program ended, I asked if Larry would give me a recommendation, like call the guy on my behalf. And then he's like, okay. And he called me back like 5 minutes later. He's like, I think I just messed things up. I got in a big argument with him. And so I was pissed off at the time. 15 years later pass. a friend of mine's on the phone. He's like, "Were you on HBO last night?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "There was Curb Your Enthusiasm, like a Larry thing." And I'm like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And so he brought a VHS tape over. We watched it, and I'm like, "That's what happened with me and him. Like, he used my name, he used my, you know." And so, I got in touch with him. I'm like, you could have asked my permission. He's like, "No, I thought you would think it was funny." And I was like, "I did think it was funny." Thankfully he didn't say anything derogatory or defamatory, but, so I was in touch with him around, that. And then, in touch a little bit, very little, but Alec, in terms of, like you say, like helping out in career, like Alec Berg was willing to take a look at a pilot idea of mine that I was working on. And so that was really nice. That was after I'd already left Los Angeles. I was from back here. I, reached out to him. So, he was, helpful in that regard. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah.
That's really great to hear, man. And just kind of along those lines, I mean, this was your first, basically, I mean, I know you said Saved by the Bell, but then 5 years at Seinfeld, which is, went from, like you said, just getting picked up to the #1 show in the country while you're there for that, right? And
yeah.
I can only imagine, like we said, you were in your mid-20s at the time when you started, right? I can only imagine you must have learned just so much being around all those people you just mentioned and still talking to them now. Some of them, what is some of the bigger takeaways you got from that experience that you've kind of carried on throughout your career, whether it was learning off Larry David or Larry Charles, like you said, getting advice from him? I mean, it sounds like, you must have just, you were around so many, iconic, talented people. You must have gotten some great.
And like, to your point, it was definitely a really fun time to be there, because it went from like a show that not many people, just to give you some idea, like, of two little bookend moments. When I first started on the show, like season 3, I would go back for summer break and I would be like, see my family, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm working on Seinfeld." "What's that?" "It's a show about a comedian and his friends." You still had to explain it still. And then then the show blew up, and it was just so wild. Like, I just remember coming in the Friday morning after we took Cheers's spot, and it just was like night and day. And it was just like a whole new world. And it was amazing, to the point where I think later on in my time there, I'm sitting Shiva for my mom, who had passed away, and a friend of hers asked me if I can get Jerry's autograph. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, so there's definitely things that changed. In terms of like takeaways, though, I always think about how many weekends we were working. Like Karen and I and Darren, we would sort of like, they would only need one of us in on the weekend, and they would work a lot of weekends, because Saved by the Bell, they had a table read on Monday, they shot on Friday. So it was sort of like weekends were a weekend. Here we read on Wednesday, shot on Tuesday. So a lot of times there were rehearsals on the weekend. There was definitely rewriting on the weekend. And, we took turns being the one who came in on the weekends with them, which was just like crickets. It was them in the room and nobody else around, and I just remember it really just, thinking about what a amazing work ethic the two of them have. That stays with me. The fact is, after they left that show, neither of them needed to work for another 5 lifetimes,
Right.
But Jerry just went right back in and retired his old stand-up act, started writing new ones, did the B movie. Like, he needed to be working, wanted to be working. And Larry certainly, could have just played golf at Riviera for the rest of his life and done, and just lived in anonymity. But I don't think he was, when Curb started, he was looking for, he's a worker. Yeah. He's a comedy worker, which is like really to his credit. And it's pretty unbelievable considering he's me too, but he just loves that process, obviously.
I know, it's interesting. You mentioned it, like these two guys, they never, worked on a sitcom before, anything really on the television sense. And they took this small thing, as Jerry calls it, a homemade show, and made it into, as you can see, the greatest comedy ever, right?
Yeah, that same one. Yeah.
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 It's a classic. Just one more for me. Continuity. Again, this is IMDb. It says continuity department, and you mentioned Babu before. Did you have to work on continuity, if you will? So like bringing back a Babu or checking on things. You said you did a lot of research. Like, George mentions he has a brother, cousin, stuff like that. Like, were you tasked with those types of things? Or you mentioned like Jackie Childs, like bringing people back. Like, I was just curious how that kind of weaved into certain arcs, if you will, or bringing characters back. If you played a part there.
I didn't really play a part there. I mean, there were just so it was really spontaneous. As they're in that room, sort of like they had a big dry erase board with the whole season, mapped out in that week's show, like all done up, the act where the act break is, all the scenes broken out, and a lot of times, I would, they would just come up with these ideas, just. I can't tell you which ones, but I'm sure I was there when they were like, what if we did this? Instead of like, they would just come up and they had really a good enough memory of what they had done and wanted to see brought back and things like that. I mean, that was really them. I just sat back and got the notes and just enjoyed the whole ride, All
right, Jeff, before we let you go, top 3 Seinfeld episodes for you of all time.
3 of all time. The Note, because of the significance, it was my first episode. That I definitely love. The Marine Biologist, I think it's just such a fantastic ending, and the panty remark is just I mean, George.
Tom Leopold.
That's Leopold's real line, right?
And
he told us
and just George squirting the ketchup bottle and Elaine's line at the end. And, like people, when they do sitcoms, they record the audience, they sweeten it, blah, blah, blah. That was the audience's genuine reaction of that line when she says, like, and they're all laid out for, she like closes the door. It was just side splitting. It's side splitting when I watch it now at home with my kids,
Wow, those are great top 3. And Jeff, I mean, you could tell just talking to you how appreciative you were of your experience there. And thanks so much for kind of
this was great.
Sharing the experience with us.
You're very welcome. No, I appreciate you having me on. And just like I said, it's been really fun, just going back and looking through your archives and seeing people that I haven't, seen in a while. Andy Robin, who I saw back, like I ran into him when he was going to med school. Like, he gave up writing and he was like, I going to med school. I ran into him at like the Museum of Science up here or something like that. And we had a nice chat. And so, but it's fun seeing them all.
Yeah. I mean, this was so great. Thank you so much, Jeff. This was great.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Have a great night.
All right. You too. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.